brought to you in part by Howard Products. Since 1969, Howard Products has made a wide range of polishes and wood finish restorers. Their hit products, such as Restore Finish and Feed and Wax, have been used in the vintage audio industry for decades, enabling vintage audio enthusiasts to keep their equipment looking as good as they sound. If you want to find out more about Howard Products or to take a look at their product range to see what you can use to bring your equipment back to life, check out www.howardproducts.com. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the eCoustics Vintage Series podcast. This is episode 7, and very excited for this one because it was rather unplanned. I hope that all of you have enjoyed the insight and conversation from our first 6 episodes, talking all things vintage components. And in this episode, we have someone who is very special to me personally, a mentor and friend, and someone who I can say confidently, speaking on behalf of the vinyl record industry, someone who is very respected, and that's Kevin Gray, mastering engineer Kevin Gray from Coherent Audio, who is here with us. I'm your moderator, Mitch Anderson from Black Circle Radio and producer of the eCoustics podcast, and our hosts, we have Eric Pye at Audio Love YYC and Jeremy Sikora at Budget Audio Filer. Welcome, everyone, to this episode.
Thanks for inviting me.
More than welcome. Jeremy, how you doing this evening?
So happy to be here. This is incredible.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to it too. I'm great. As people are probably aware from prior episodes of the podcast, I'm a bit of a KG fanboy. So this is exciting. Just prior, you'll see that on my wall behind me, they're all albums that Kevin Gray has had a hand in some way. And I just did a Discogs search earlier today to find that I have 138 different albums that Kevin was somehow involved in.
Wow.
I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who have more, but love his work, and it's really, really fun to be here chatting. Well, thank you very much.
Eric, do you mind kicking us off here to start this episode about what you are looking for to learn from this conversation with Kevin, and feel free to direct the first question.
Sure. The biggest thing I'm interested in, we've just spent 6 episodes talking about, what we have and what we look for when we're getting components. I'd like to know what Kevin listens to at home. And I'd also be interested to know what some of the things are that he maybe, thinks about when maybe he doesn't buy a lot of equipment anymore because he's got a pretty kick-ass system already, but what he was looking for when he was putting it together.
Wow. What I was looking for when I was putting it together. Well, I tend to build a lot of things myself. So I built the loudspeaker system. It's actually the same loudspeaker system that Mitch has heard in my studio. It's configured slightly differently because I have, an 8-foot screen in between the speakers for a front projection system. So I have the mid-range 12-inch double mids, and then the Dynaudio mid-range and tweeter on the 2 sides flanking the screen, and then the subwoofers are in a line below the whole screen system. And there is a center channel system too, at the very middle. But so that's the speakers. So we'll work backwards from there. The crossovers were all designed by me and built from scratch. The power amplifiers, I'm using a little different power amplification. We built some really trick custom amps for the studio, but that would have been very expensive and time consuming to duplicate. So I bought Harman Kardon Citation 7.1 amplifiers, which is basically a 4-channel amp that can be configured as separate amplifiers or bridged, or just about any way you want to do it. So I'm using basically 2 of those, for left and right, one bridge to drive the subwoofers and one for the mid and sub bass, mid bass. And then back from that, I have a custom line stage that's solid state. I've been using that since probably like the mid 80s. And then ahead of that for records, I have a a vacuum tube phonopre that I built, which kind of interestingly was sort of the test bed for the circuitry for my tube disc cutting system.
Nice.
I jumped into the whole thing of using passive EQ and was very happy with the sound of that. So that's also what I used in the disc cutting, the tube disc cutting system that I've built. And then the turntable is a Technics SP10 Mark III, which was the last high-end table that they built before vinyl went away, like in '87, I think, is when they finished that. And it's in a custom plinth with a SME 3012, 12-inch arm, and a V15 Type 5, and that's it. And
So
I have an FM tuner and Macintosh. And
so there's basically none of that stuff that if I were interested in getting something the same that I could possibly find anywhere.
well, the turntable,
Yeah.
and the tone arm, and the cartridge. So that part. Well, like I said, the amplification that I'm using is
Card.
Right.
Yeah, they aren't making the 7.1 anymore, but they're out there. It's a great amplifier. I'm very impressed with them.
Right.
Actually, a friend of mine designed that amplifier. He's the guy that I met when I bought my my first Macintosh 275, the early one. Geez, I'm trying to think of his name. I'm having a brain fart here. What is his name? Anyway.
While you think about that, I'm just picturing all the people going on eBay right now looking for the Harman Kardon 7.1 citation.
Yeah, it's a good app. I have one and only one complaint with it. After having a couple of amps that had relays in the output for protection, in case there's DC or whatever to keep blowing up the speakers. Relays in the outputs of power amplifiers, since they have so much current going through them, almost always fail. And I'm just now, after having the amps for well over a decade, starting to experience that problem. So that's kind of a bitch, but it's a minor one, all in all.
So are the amps going to have to go, or are you just going to repair
No,
them?
I got to figure out what the relay is and get in there and replace them. I don't know if they plug in or they're soldered in or what the deal is. I haven't looked. I haven't dug in yet.
Kevin, do you in a nutshell here before we take it over to Jeremy, do you mind, you mentioned specifically passive EQ. Do you mind clarifying the passive active difference right there?
Okay, well, passive basically just has no electronics, no amplification in it. No amplification. So that means that they will cut only. It won't boost. So the way you normally use those is you turn all of the controls all the way up, and then you notch out the things that are causing you problems.
So if you have a tone control on your receiver at home and you can boost the signal, what
Right.
you're describing, Kevin, is the opposite of that.
I
It's
guess
that
you
kind
would
of.
say that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's cut only, no boost.
Would
Cut
that
only.
then kind of be like if you have a regular EQ on your receiver, only using the negative parts of
It would be
those
the
buttons?
effect of that, but
Yeah.
although it's cleaner than that because there aren't transistors or tubes or anything else after it.
Right.
It's totally passive. I'll tell you, the ones that I use to EQ the speakers, both here and I'm at home now, and at the studio, are the ones made by White Instruments. It's called a model 4320, and they're scarce as hen's teeth. But the thing is, because most people don't know what to do with a passive EQ, you can get them cheap, in spite of being, kind of rare. So when they pop up on eBay, I bought a bunch of them because I was selling them to my friends and using them in various other systems that I was building for people, and I was paying like $70 a unit for them. It's a 19-inch rack mount, 25 knob or 26 knob, whatever it is. Third octave equalizer.
If you have any left, I'm guessing Jeremy wants to buy one.
I don't think I do right now. But like I say, they pop up on eBay.
They are
I will
really
be
cool.
hunting.
Jeremy,
Of course, I won't be able to get any more now.
Let's yeah, good job. Yeah, good sell on that one. No more, your friends won't either. Jeremy, let's pass it over to you for what your thoughts are and what interests you have here having Kevin on the show.
Oh, absolutely. So, so I too am a fan of having solid state mixed in with the tubes, but I don't know why, other than I love the sound of it. So, can you elaborate in a more technical reason why you have solid state mixed in with the tubes? Because I absolutely love it, but
Well,
that's just my ears.
some of it is to eliminate things like having to put audio step up and step down transformers in the circuit, because you can drive very low impedances with solid state stuff, and you can't do that with tubes, which I learned really quickly when I was designing my all tube system for my recording system. It's tricky to do it with tubes. So that's why my line stage, which is driving my it's basically driving the crossovers to the speakers. I've got the line stages in my rack with my gear, and then I have the amplifiers and the crossover networks in the speaker, or in the same area. And so I run like 30 feet of cable from my line stage to the crossovers, and solid state will do that a lot better than tubes. So
excellent.
Can I ask you a related question to that?
Sure.
So I get a lot of questions on Instagram about whether it's better to go tube pre solid state power or the other way around. What's your take on that?
I really like slamming bottom end, so I tend to go with the power being solid state, which it is in my systems, both of them. But I do like tube phono preamps. Well, I should put a caveat in there. It depends on the tubes that you use and how you configure them. But I particularly like the passive RIAA. I just think that's the only way to fly.
Gotcha.
Can you divulge a little bit into that, Kevin? What that means?
Well,
Please.
Okay, sure, no problem. In most of the phono preamps in the day, and I'm going back here to Macintosh and Marantz, and then Audio Research, and on up until just, I would say probably in the last couple of decades, people have started going into the passive realm. But the problem, particularly with tubes, is that you have a lot less gain in a tube than you do in a transistor. And so when you put the RIAA in a feedback loop around the amplifier, and you're trying to do basically 40 dB of EQ, on the playback end of it, you're boosting the bottom 20 dB and you're dropping the top 20 dB on playback. To do that with a feedback loop around a tube, you don't really have enough gain to keep distortion really low and to make it all work well. So that's the whole thing in a nutshell.
I think I might get that tattooed on my forearm.
That whole couple of paragraphs, that's going to be
a whole paragraph.
Let's put RIAA with a big loop going around it.
Yeah, okay. There you go.
So another a question I had is in the form of playback rather than cutting and recording. But as far as playback goes, when you began cutting in 72, nailed it. Then when you started cutting then and doing the Tone Poet series now amongst the Peter Bronsman stuff and Aramite record, and it's Coleman, I mean so much stuff, not Coleman, but that I have George Coleman on the wall behind me. But so you're cutting this stuff now and working with the pressing plants now and RTI and Memphis, and the list goes on and on. What are you hearing when you're going into someone's home, or when you're listening back in your system? What differences are you noticing in like vintage technology of the time, from the pressing industry to the modern time now?
Oh, that's a bunch of questions all rolled into one.
Mitch has a habit of doing that.
Yeah, no, it's all right. It's all right. Well, let's take one element at a time. So when you say vintage pressings, you're talking about comparing reissues to originals?
No, I'm more. I mean, that would be a good question. I would just the feel of the feel of the sound, I guess. Going.
Vintage versus newer equipment.
Yeah, I mean, you've been in the industry and been such an active hand in making the records, but are also building your own equipment, and you've heard so much equipment that is made now and was made then. Are there any what differences or similarities do you kind of notice between then and now?
Okay. Well, let me. I'm going to go off on a slight tangent here, but I think this will answer your question when we get to the end. I have noticed audiophile sound, for a better lack of a better word, kind of go full circle. You know, the whole emphasis in the 50s and 60s was trying to get to a point of accuracy. And then somewhere along the line in the 90s and the 2000s, I'm sorry, but systems started sounding weird to me. You know, all the single-ended tube stuff, and big horn speakers, and all of the things that I had tried to stay away from became extant. And now I think it seems to be swinging back the other way. As an example, when you were with me, Mitch, when we took the test pressing of my album, that I recorded into a few different rooms, I was hearing pretty similar things to what I heard on my system at home. That was a first for me, because
you're talking about at the show. At the show in California.
Yeah, exactly, in Long Beach. Because there was a period a decade ago where the sound was, if you took a record around from room to room to room, the sound was totally different in every room you walked into, and which kind of spooked me out, because, you kind of think what a record sounds like, and then all of a sudden it's sounding totally different. And so I think that's kind of gone full circle, which is good. And the beautiful part of it is it can be done with tubes and horns. It just takes the right designers. I have a good friend, his name is Ali Lehman, and he's kind of a fanboy too, for lack of a better word. But no, he actually contacted me and said, my wife and I would love to take you and your wife out for a really nice dinner, and I'd like you to come back to my home in Beverly Hills and listen to my sound system and tell me what you think of it.
Ooh. Using
stuff that I had cut as the reference, and he had it. I didn't have to bring anything. He had, this was kind of this is before the Tone Poets. This is in the Music Matters era when I first met him. So I go over, we go out to dinner, have a wonderful dinner at Vibrato, which is Herb Alpert's club in Brentwood. And we went back to his home in Beverly Hills, and have you ever heard avant-garde trios? Do you know what those are? It's a giant horn system, all with round horns, a round bass horn, a round mid-range horn, a round, tweeter horn, and they're all on a stand. And then he has this massive horn subwoofer that's like probably 7 feet wide and 5 feet high at least.
How big was this room?
It's in a pretty good sized room, probably 20 by 30 or bigger. It's a big room.
He has a ski hill inside it.
What's that?
He has a ski hill inside it.
Yeah, right. No, well, we talk about inside it. It's kind of like listening to headphones, when you hear the system. But and he's using all single-ended tube amplification by some company in Italy, and the speakers are made in Germany, the avant-gardes. But I was shocked that the sound was familiar to me, and it was really good. Of course, he can play it extremely loud with horns, but it was clean and pretty natural sounding. It had a little bit of a exaggerated presence, I thought, but that's probably something he likes about it.
It sounded horny.
Right. You said it, I didn't.
Jeremy, let's take it back to you for any questions any further questions that you have for Kevin personally, or questions that people have asked you that you would dig on getting an answer from.
Yeah, I think there's no better person to ask this. So, have you come across some equipment that punches above its weight class?
Nice question.
Are you talking financially above its weight class?
I would say yes. Yes.
Okay.
So I think all of us see equipment that could be out of reach for most, but stuff that's a little more obtainable that you're surprised when you hear it. Now, this could be speakers, this could be anything out there, but anything that you've come across that you've been like, wow.
I just heard a new speaker that I'm very impressed with. It's funny, after all of this MoFi stuff went down, I got invited down, Joe and I, Joe Harley, got invited down to MoFi's. They built a listening room down in Santa Monica on the west side, or West LA, I guess. Yeah, it's not Santa Monica, it's West LA. And they designed a new speaker that's going to be a MoFi speaker. And
Really?
It's a 10-inch coax in about a 2.5 cubic foot box. And he had them on small stands to get the speaker up, close to ear level when you're seated, and they sounded phenomenal. So it's a new product. I don't know what they're calling it, but it'll be the new MoFi 10-inch coax. And I think they retail for $3,000 a pair, if I'm not mistaken. So in today's world, that's not exorbitant. I mean,
What on that question, Jeremy? What was Kevin? Do you remember your kind of like first system that you're like, oh, well, this is a sound?
Oh, I can tell you that real clearly. So in 1966, I was like 12, and I moved in next door to a guy who had a nice component system. And I had never heard a nice component system. I had heard my little, Sears Silvertone suitcase stereo, and I had heard my parents' boombox Magnavox. And that's what I thought, not hi-fi, but I thought that's just the way music sounds, when you play it.
Music, right?
And he had, this is 1966, so he had Tube Electronics, he had Macintosh Phonoprix, Macintosh 240 power amplifier, had JBL Studio Monitor S7 speakers, Thorn's turntable, even had a reel-to-reel deck. It was an old, it was made by TIAC, but it was sold under another name in the US. It was a model 505, I remember, A505. Anyway, first of all, he played me some stuff that blew me away. And then I went home and got some of my records and came back and played them on his system. And I was hearing stuff that I'd never heard before. I didn't even know it was on the record, I mean, things like just on the Tijuana brass, all the little percussive things and, just stuff like that.
I'm interested.
And so that rocked my world. That changed my life right there. I had to have a component stereo system now. So I started working on building one at that point. And that guy, his name is Doug Shepard, and he became my business partner and designed all the analog electronics that are in my room, the solid state system.
So Kevin, can I ask you,
he's 9 years older, I should explain. That's how he had the money to build this system.
Of course. That's funny.
I was 12. He was like 21.
Kevin, there's a psychological term called imprinting. Do you think that the sound from that particular system, does that continue with you? Is there
absolutely?
So that's like a reference for you?
Well, I've moved beyond that, I think,
Yeah.
but that I can still hear that sound in my head. And when I first met Bob McLeod, who was my mentor at Artisan Sound Recorders that I first went to work for, he had a very different system. He actually had a JBL T-circuit power amplifier and Altec A7s in the big walnut cabinet. I think it was called maybe the Valencia. I don't remember for sure. And he had a Sony TTS 3000 turntable, which my friend Doug also bought very shortly after that. And, I'm hearing stuff like the Doors that he had cut, like Soft Parade. And I was blown away by that sound. And that got to be a real dilemma. It's like, do I like Doug's system better or do I like Bob's system better? I'd be listening to Bob's. Oh, yeah, Bob's definitely better. I go back to Doug's. Oh, no, I think Doug's might be as an edge, So that was kind of tough on me at the time.
How did that kind of influence? How did that kind of how did you come out of that as you? Because your sound, uh, in Coherent Studios, just the amount of tears, that were going on sitting in there, and partaking and learning, apprenticing under you, uh, it is that's a snapshot moment for me, where that sound will never leave my head. Being immersed in that space, and so that's imprinting. I'm glad you said that, Eric. I hadn't really heard that term that way before.
Yeah, I
Thank
got
you.
it totally when you said it.
Yeah. How did
Well,
where did you come out of that?
well, there's a lot of facets to that. Are we talking about my perception of how to EQ something? Are we talking about what I think is a good, accurate loudspeaker system? I mean, because to me, it kind of all goes together.
Right.
If
It
you
does.
haven't got an accurate loudspeaker system, you really don't know what you're doing when you're EQing. And so that was a quest for me for a number of years, because I
Sure.
started mastering on JBL, and then when Artisan built the studio down the street in Hollywood, we had Westlake build the rooms, and we had the Westlake monitors. I don't know if you've ever heard those or not, but
Mm-mm.
they kind of rip your ears off. They're real bright and harsh, and I was not thrilled with that sound at all. I managed to work with them. I played enough stuff that I knew on them, that I knew how to relate to them. But I went on a quest that went, for the first 15 years of my mastering career, trying to find a loudspeaker system that I thought was really accurate, and I wound up having to build it. So
There's a
well, I'll
thanks for
tell you,
this episode.
there was a life changer in that realm too.
Yeah.
I had mostly
Right.
heard horn systems, and had kind of gotten used to the horn system thing. I knew that they sounded harsh, but I didn't know why. That kind of thing. And then I heard some speakers at a high-end stereo store down in Beverly Hills, made by the German company Braun, Braun. It's actually pronounced brown, like the color in German.
Precursor of ADS.
Later on, it became
Yeah.
ADS Braun,
Yeah.
but it started out as
Cool.
Braun, and they built a three-way tri-amplified system that used a 12-inch woofer, a 2-inch dome mid-range, and a 3/4-inch dome tweeter. And the thing that impressed the hell out of me more than anything else, it's going to sound kind of crazy, is I could sit and listen to it for an hour and my ears didn't get tired. That was a change for me. I was used to speakers sounding a little harsher, and but yet they had the detail. They had the detail, but they didn't hurt my ears. So anyway, that's kind of what got me going in the dome direction. And then I discovered Dyne Audio domes. I heard one of their big systems, and then at the time they OEM'd their drivers, so you could buy the drivers, at various dealers, and that's gone away. Now they're only building systems again. So, but I've used them in basically all the speakers I've built since the 80s, and I've never heard anything I like better.
Nice.
Jeremy, before we start wrapping here, I heard loud and clear something that you just said, Kevin, was, I could sit and I could listen to these things for over an hour. And I think that on something I resonate with on your platform, Jeremy, and yours too, Eric, especially with the rug in the room, is that the comfort of the system is very important for the longevity of the hobby and the enjoyment, or the career, or the passion. Eric and Jeremy, do either of you want to speak on that point for a second before I get to the final question that I wanted to ask?
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Jeremy.
so I'll be super brief here, but I have heard speakers that I didn't want to listen to for a long time, and then as I progressed, I learned why, and then there's other ones that if you put them in the right place, you just sit back and then you listen to it, and it just becomes part of the room, and that has been, I firmly think everyone can find that space. And once you do, it's just a fantastic part of the house.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say similar. On the speaker placement, I remember going to there was a record concert here in Calgary a couple of years ago at the Audio Room here, and they played Fleetwood Mac's Rumors. And I remember looking at the placement of the speakers, the way that they had them in that room, and thinking, that's totally different from the speakers in my room, because my speakers were up against the wall, and these were pulled out. And as soon as I got home, I pulled my speakers out and was just blown away by the difference in the sound. And the shag rug room became an even better room. But yeah, that whole speaker placement thing, yeah, it can make a huge difference.
That's true.
To speakers that you think sound terrible, and they become good. That doesn't fix all speakers, because I had another pair of speakers that I tried the same thing with, and it didn't really help. But those have been sold a long time ago.
Oh, can I have one quick thing?
You can have all the quick things you want, Kevin.
Well, one of the things that I appreciated about these the new MoFi speakers, whatever they're calling them, was that everything that I played on them sounded good, but not like it had a sonic signature where it all sounded the same. But everything was warm and clear, and the only other small speakers that I've, because I like really big speakers, but the only other small speakers are even smaller, and that's my Harbeth 30s. I have a pair of those, and gosh, I mean, everything I play on them sounds great. I can play Frank Sinatra, and then I can play the Doors, and then I can play, you name it. And it sounds warm and clear, which is two of the attributes that I really appreciate in a loudspeaker.
I had a question prepared that I think that I kind of want to ditch it because I think that I would, given time and everything, but I think a more appropriate question that I really want to ask is, like, Kevin, if you had this series, this is our final episode, 7th episode of the 6, all on vintage components, and the Eric and Jeremy and myself's journey within that experience. If you had, some advice for someone who is wanting to begin partaking in vintage audio and discovering sound for themselves, where I say I want to match what's in my head in my space, and that's difficult to do. But what advice would you have for someone who is curious about getting into this?
That's a tough one. Well, obviously, the very first question you have to ask is what's your price range here?
There you go.
Can you afford 500, 1,000, 3,000? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's some big steps in that range, and also, in terms of vintage, it can get really expensive. I mean, I can't believe how anything with tubes in it has gone through the roof. I mean, for years, the Macintosh and Marantz stuff was going away because it was all getting shipped to Japan. And then it went, it kind of trickled down into, Dynaco and Ico and Heathkit, and, all of that stuff's expensive now. So I wouldn't know how to guide somebody into this stuff anymore. I used to tell people buy a Dynaco Stereo 35 or buy a Dynaco Stereo 70 power amplifier and like a PAS 3X preamp, and you could buy those cheap, but not anymore. I mean, the preamps are probably going for, I don't know, $300-400, and the amplifier is probably going for that or more. So that's not a cheap way into tubes anymore.
And tubes aren't cheap anymore.
Oh God, yeah. Especially now with what's going on in Russia. I haven't looked at the prices. Fortunately, I've got a huge stockpile of all of the tubes that I use in my system and in my collection of Macintosh amps and stuff. I have a pretty good collection of Macintosh tube amps.
Any of you guys want to respond to that quick?
The only layer I would add to it is yes, absolutely, those brands are climbing in price. I've been pretty lucky there's a local tube tech, and he makes his own.
There you go.
and he releases them into the wild for between $150 and $400.
That's nice. That's sweet.
And everything about it. And he is very critical of his own work. So he'll be the first to say, well, this is the best, this is good, and this is just okay. And then I've heard his just okay actually this evening, and it was pretty fantastic for $150. So
Nice.
So there are options out there, but as Kevin said, the name brands are definitely sought
Yeah,
after.
there's a Chinese company that makes some nice products. Is it Cayenne or something like that?
Cayenne, yeah.
Yeah.
Cayenne, Cayin.
Yeah, I think, that
Yeah.
sounds right. Anyway, I heard one of their power amplifiers. A friend of mine bought one, and actually he was having a bit of difficulty with it and brought it over, and I fixed it for him. But I put it on my bench and plugged it into the speakers that I have on either side of my test bench, and it sounded pretty nice. I was blown away.
That is a good tie-in right there, where you still can get, like with the vintage audio, the components and the design and the circuitry, the tubes, the new creations of these like the new tube amps that are being created. That design is a vintage design. So getting in, that's an angle I didn't really quite think about through this series, which is cool to think about in that way, especially Jeremy, with you saying, bringing it up, people making it DIY and doing it out of their own shops. And
Right.
That's a really cool doorway into this sound.
Mhm.
The only question I was going to ask Kevin is, what didn't age well? What vintage equipment did not age well?
Well, the early solid state stuff was pretty abysmal. The amplifiers that were coming out in like 64, 65, 66 mostly used germanium transistors. They used interstage transformers in them. They did all kinds of, weird stuff. And I went into a guy's recording studio where he had bought a board that was made in like 1970. And I won't mention the name and I won't mention the studio, but it was the worst sounding piece of junk I'd ever heard. I mean, it was bright and harsh. It had no low bass, and it just distorted on everything you put through it. You couldn't drive things hard. It had no headroom, And fortunately, we got past that fairly quickly.
Anything, Eric, Jeremy, or Kevin, in closing for this episode? Thank you, Kevin Gray, Coherent Audio, for joining us here on this eCoustics podcast vintage series. Any closing comments from any of you?
Other than thanks, no, I greatly enjoyed the conversation. Thanks,
Very
Kevin,
fun.
for your insights.
Yeah, both of my kids bought vinyl this week, so thank you so
Cool.
much for being a part of that.
That's awesome.
For
Start
this
'em young.
episode,
Oh yeah,
no joke. For this episode of the eCoustics podcast vintage series, and our final for this series, until we decide to do another season or whatever we want to call it, I've been your moderator, Mitch Anderson, producer of eCoustics, host of Black Circle Radio. Our hosts, Jeremy at Budget Audio Filer, Jeremy Sikora, Eric Pye at Audio Love YYC. Phenomenal job on this series, both of you. Congratulations, proud of you. And thank you as well to the Kevin Gray, mastering engineer, Coherent Audio. Thanks for being here, man.
Thanks for inviting me. It was fun.
Yeah.
Had a good time.
Remember to hit subscribe, comment, share it around, and don't try to tag Kevin on Instagram, because you will fall into a dead space.
Yeah.
We'll see
Yeah,
you
I'm not much of a social media guy. I don't even respond to Facebook really, but yeah.
We'll see you next time.
All right. Thanks for inviting me to do it.
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick bonus question?
Sure.
It's a tiny one. Being obviously so close to vinyl, how much does the stylus make a difference? That's probably something. The only
cutting
thing,
stylus or the playback stylus?
the playback one. That's probably the only thing that you haven't made. I'm not sure.
Oh, right. Yeah, I really, they're scarce as hen's teeth now, but I really like the Shure 15 Type 5.
Okay.
It was very flat frequency response, tracks anything. Yeah, it makes a huge difference. For instance, a conical stylus, will not really track the inner grooves on a record worth a damn, and most of the, like the Stantons and the ones that the DJs use are conical, tend to be. So, but yeah, ellipticals and hyper ellipticals do a much better job.
But as far as components go, where would you, is that what you're kind of asking, Jeremy? Like,
no. He answered exactly what I was looking for. Like,
Okay.
Man,
yeah.
my head went totally like, where do you put it in the category of importance? Like the stylus over the other components?
Well, yeah, it's it's really kind of hard to divide things out. I mean, it's all important. It all adds up. But that's kind of where the whole thing starts in terms of the playback. So it's a very critical part.
I have a question too.
Sure.
And this comes into buying equipment. I go on eBay quite a lot looking at Denon turntables from Japan, and they're all 100 volts. Does one need like a step-down transformer or
Yes.
variac to use those here?
Yeah, I would just buy a step-down transformer,
Right.
120 to 100, and you need to check what the wattage, what the current that the turntable draws, and make sure that your step-down transformer is rated for that, and you're good to go.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
I've done it.
Right. Okay. Well, there we go. My next purchase, another Denon turntable.
There you go.
Yeah.
Weren't they the ones that built the one that kind of looks like a Neumann lathe? Wasn't that Denon?
Neumann lathe.
It had a big, thick platter with two strobe rings, one for 45, one for 33. Does that ring a bell?
Not with Denon. Denon is famous for the turntables that look like UFOs.
Yeah, I know what a lot of their stuff does.
Yeah, but that one I don't recall.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll look it up and tell Mitch.
Homework for all of our listeners.
Right.
Kevin, so I guess my bonus question is, what was the biggest, what was like one of the bigger screw ups that happened out of something you built? Like, holy crap, I can't believe I just broke that.
Something I built?
Yeah, like in this, like what were like what's one of those moments for you in the studio?
I don't think I've had an experience like that I can remember. I mean,
perfect answer. I'm so happy.
I this is kind of an aside, but for a while I was building guitar amps for people.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of funny because I had a guitar amp that was sort of like a Vox AC30, but not. It had a lot of tone options on it that you don't have with an AC30. Anyway, I built it up, finished the mods. It was actually sitting on my bench running. I'm on the phone with the guy that I had put this together for, and I look over and smoke is pouring out of it. And it didn't even blow a fuse. I ran over and yanked the power cord out of the, my power strip. And it turned out the power transformer just failed for no apparent reason. Just, it was sort of what they call infant mortality. It was brand new. And I'd been using the same transformers for a number of years. Never had a problem with one. And this one just failed.
While you're on the phone with the guy?
Yeah. I went, you might have to wait a week before I get this to you.
Oh shit, your amp just died.
And then I told him what happened, and he laughed about it because he didn't need it, tomorrow. But when you asked that question, that's the first thing that popped into my mind.
That's funny. Why do you have to put it? And then I know you got it. We all got it. I got to go. But when from a tech, like with a variac, like, you don't plug an old piece of equipment in before testing it. But I mean, one time I plugged in I was at an antique shop. I'm like, oh man, this is a pretty sweet, a pretty sweet little radio. And I was like, okay, it's got some all right tubes in it and everything kind of looks okay. I checked it out and, nothing was frayed. And I plugged that thing in and it blew the whole socket up in the wall.
Whoa.
Like there was
in the shop or at home?
In the shop.
Oh,
The smoke alarm went off. I'm like,
so you broke it, you bought it, right?
I told him to throw it away,
Oh.
or like get rid of this and don't sell this stuff anymore, please. Or I just raised my hand and, hey, no worries here. There's an audio guy in the room. Like, it's okay. Like, we're good here, folks. But it was terrible. When something sits, everything looked fine. I didn't see any bulged caps. I didn't see.
No, they don't
like,
have to bulge. When they get really old, they dry up, and as soon as you hit them with a lot of current, they can literally explode. You know, it's not uncommon. And so it's good practice to always bring up, especially old tube gear on a Variac.
So would you kind of say, like, if you're into the vintage audio hobby, it's like a pretty good investment period just to like have a Variac
Absolutely.
and learn how to use it?
Right.
Okay. Yeah, that's
Right.
that was a good. I'm glad I asked that. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Man, all right.
All right. I'm going to get to
Awesome.
my dinner.
There we go.
My wife just walked in the door with food.
Oh, hi, Charlene.
She's in the other room.
Okay, well,
enjoy your dinner. Thanks for sitting
thank
in
you
with
so
us.
much.
Oh, it was very fun. Very fun.
Okay.
Let's
Yeah,
do it
Deborah-
again.
Deborah says hi
Sure.
too.
Hi,
To all of you, and Jeremy and Eric. Deborah says congratulations on a series wrap.
Okay.
Thank you.
So awesome. We'll talk to everybody
Take care,
soon.
guys.
Okay.
All
Thank you
right.
so much. Have
Thanks,
a great
guys.
night.
See ya.
Most welcome. Bye.